Hey everyone, my guest today is Adam Platt. Adam is famous for many things, but maybe most famous for being a contributing editor and restaurant critic for New York Magazine for decades. He won the James Beard Foundation Journalism Award for Restaurant Reviews. During the course of nearly 25 years in the magazine business, he has written for a variety of publications, including The New Yorker, The New York Observer, Esquire, and Condé Nast Traveler. He's the author of The Book of Eating, and once he posted to his Instagram a photo of the eclairs I brought to a party, and I felt like I had won the dinner guest gold medal. By the way, he still continues to write for Grub Street. Welcome, Adam Platt, to the podcast. Hello.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
It is
Couple of minor corrections.
great. Do
I
it.
was a, I was the, I've been in the magazine business for like, I don't know, 450 years, for very much,
Okay.
very long time, since the,
That's a long
since the,
time.
since the mid 80s. I started as the New York Magazine's restaurant critic in 2000, and then I left in 2003. So I actually was in that job for way too long. Not 10 years, but double that. But now I'm not in that job, so I'm free to say whatever I want. You're free to look at me. You're free to I'm free to say your eclairs for the most delicious eclairs that I've ever tasted in my life. And I'm completely not connected with that world anymore, although because for various reasons, money, health, all sorts of things. But I do occasionally go out on the town. So, fire away. All questions are fair.
Well, let's talk about that. I feel like, you're a superhero who finally has taken his mask off, and I want to know how that feels after so long. And I also want to know when you were wearing your mask, what were some of your favorite pseudonyms that you would use when you would go into a restaurant?
Oh, you know, I never really wore the mask. You've met me, so you know that I'm 6 foot, whatever, 10. I'm not 6'10", but I'm large. And as I continue to have that job, I got larger and larger and fatter and
Right.
fatter. I have no hair. It's very hard to disguise me. So I always felt that that was sort of a losing situation. But I did feel that if you, and this is true, that if you it's generally true. But if you use a fake name, they you might get a little jump on the restaurant. But in a place like New York City, if they're have a new chef or they're opening, really in for the first 2 months, they're looking for you. They have people looking for you. They have people at the bar looking for you. They have all your pictures. You can disguise yourself. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. I'll tell you the names. What did I do now? I did names of my ex-wife's former boyfriends. I did names of my favorite baseball team growing up, which is the Washington Senators. I did all of them. Tim Cullen, the second baseman. I mean, it doesn't really matter. And then you just get bored. And I had similar names. I had this pseudonym Andre Dusky. I don't know. I lost my mind basically. I lost my mind. Uh, but I remember when I first got the job, it was like a couple months in, and it was a French restaurant called Le Perigord, which was closed, but it'd been open. It's open near the UN in that area where the UN is. Been open for a long time. The same owner who would greet his guests in a tuxedo, okay, like Monsieur whatever, right? A descendant of the great 60s era restaurants that opened throughout New York, like Le Caravelle, Le Côte Basque. This Perigord was one of the last ones to close. And they brought in a fancy chef at some point. It's in the early aughts, 2000. And so I thought I'd go there for lunch. So I snuck in for lunch. My mother loved French food. I invited her. So I go in and I'm wearing a turtleneck or whatever. Nobody's seen me. It's been 2 months or whatever. I'm a nobody. I had never had any experience either as a food writer or as a critic before, by some miracle, I was offered this job. And so this gentleman, his name I forgot, but it's in my book. Um, I said, whatever stupid name I gave. And he said, "This way, monsieur." Okay, sat me in the worst possible seat in the house, right by the flapping kitchen door. Tink, 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 tink. And I go, "Well, my mother's coming. Keep an eye out for her." He goes, "Oui, monsieur." And then he gave me this giant menu, like billions of pages, and blah, 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 blah. He's dressed in his tuxedo. And my mother hadn't arrived yet. And so I said to him, which is what I thought people should say in this weird restaurant world, which I'm just trying to figure out what was going on. I said to him, "What's good today, Monsieur Le Perigord?" And he said, "You tell me, you're the critic." Then he walked away. I was like, "Whoa, whoa, ooh, ooh." So anyway, they know.
Did you feel like you'd made it?
No, felt like a fool. He stuck me into the worst seat in the house. He's basically saying, "We know your deal. We don't really care. Have fun." It was not. He wanted to show me that he was not impressed.
That's right.
And you know what? Good for him.
Yeah.
It's like it's critics. I mean, I think critics are great, right? And I think critics serve a purpose, right? Especially, you could argue, in the restaurant world, a place like New York City, where it's certainly today, you're going to go out and blow $500 possibly. So you need critics to tell you whether that's a decent investment or not. On the other hand, restaurants are a work of love, they're a work of labor. Monsieur Perigord had been around for decades. He knew way more about his restaurant or about the cooking of the restaurant or his new chef than I ever would. I just showed up, sat down, had a meal. You go to restaurants, anybody can sit down and have a meal, right? Anybody can do that. Anybody can have an opinion. Restaurant criticism, unlike, say, book criticism or TV criticism or movie criticism, they're all reading the same thing, right? They're seeing the same movie. The restaurant, as any critic will tell you, any restaurant person will tell you, you will know. Your experience can change depending on where you sit, i.e. by the kitchen, if the door is flapping in your face, or by a sunlit table in a quiet room, or what time of day it is, or whether the chef has a cold that day, or there are many variables. What you like to eat. So there are many different variables when it comes to being a restaurant critic and when it comes to people enjoying food. Whereas the other things are like they're pretty much dealing from the same slate. So my point being, it's extremely, I think there's this desperate attempt, like by giving stars, like the Times will give stars, Michelin gave stars. There's this attempt to objectify this world, which is in fact the most subjective world out there. Okay. And they asked me to give stars for a while, and I bungled the whole thing. Critics don't like stars generally because they know it's a subjective world. They don't want to be seen as aping another star system. The people that tend to be really fixated on the stars are the chefs, and so they're just going to go crazy about it. And then it also gives the diners, I used to think, I mean, basically, while I was a restaurant critic, say you're looking at Michelin, let's look at the Michelin of the Times, okay? Basically, in those two systems, stars meant money, right? The one-star restaurant, you're selling a burger for whatever, $20 or something. Just go up the pecking order, but by the time you get to 4, it's a fancy omakase meal. The tuna is being flown in from Tokyo. There's souffles everywhere, and there's great wines, and basically it's a perfectly good meal, but it's also a bunch of bullshit, right? It's a category of dining, okay? It's not quality. It's a category. Michelin 3-star restaurant is a category of restaurant. You can go to a Michelin 3-star restaurant, and you can expect to spend a ton of money and to be probably snobbed off by a continental chef and possibly enjoy yourself. And you want to maybe go there once or twice in your life. Okay. But it's not really the place that normal human beings will eat for a long time for very much. It's not, I mean, I personally didn't want to recommend those places. Okay. See what I'm saying? See what I'm saying?
I do.
Whereas the 1-star restaurant, and this is true of Michelin, anybody knows about Michelin. Anyway, I don't want to go on about Michelin, but Michelin is like the further they get away from France, the less sense they make. You can tweet that. They know that. Less sense they make. New York, who knows? Like maybe Tokyo. Tokyo has replaced Paris as the great dining city. Tokyo has famously more Michelin stars than any other city in the world. Fine, fine, fine. But it's like it's just anyway. Stars are not something that critics are wild about because they cause for a simple working critic, which is what I was for City Magazine. They cause more headaches and they create more headaches than is worth it.
I want to talk a little bit about young Adam and, you know, anyone who's interested in food criticism, and you knows that you were the son of a diplomat. And that meant that you spent a lot of your youth in Asia and a lot of time being what I would describe, but maybe you didn't feel this way, as an outsider in many different cultures. But I don't want to use words to describe your experience, but I do want to talk a little bit about what it was like to be you as a kid, because something about what you do lends itself, at least superficially, to someone who is not obsessed with what other people think of them, right? You are in a career, and obviously it shifted recently, and you're liberated from some of this, where you are walking into situations where you may make people unhappy. And I think to have the kind of constitution to stand by that and not worry about what everybody thinks, a lot of who we are is born out of who we were in our early stages of life. And I want to see if there's a way to connect the dots between your sense of self and what you ended up doing as a career. I loved at the beginning of your book, I really think of it as a memoir as much as it has essays about culture and food and being a world traveler, but just the way you talk about family slays me. I loved it so much. I loved how much I could see your grandparents and your relatives and Uncle Frank and all these incredible characters. So folks, I really recommend Adam's book, because even if you're not interested in food, it's a great memoir and it's so well written. So bravo. It's fantastic. But separate from
You're
that,
very, you're very kind. Thank you so much.
it's just, well, it's
Very,
my subjective opinion as a
very,
non-critic.
very kind, and you can all pick it up for $1.50 at your nearest outlet.
Fabulous, fabulous. Not a lot of money and to get a lot out of it.
You know, I'm supposed to be writing another one. Okay, for a quick
Well,
plug.
as soon as we're done, you'll get back to it.
It's called 12 Meals, a grumpy gourmand's doomed search for perfection. So I'm like traveling around, and each chapter is my doomed search. So I just got back, not just like a couple months ago, I went to India looking for the perfect mango. I went to Tokyo looking for the perfect bowl of ramen. Of course, did I find it? I don't know. But anyway, let me tell you. Okay, let me tell you. Should I talk about my childhood? My
I
childhood
would really love that.
is my childhood was I was the son of a diplomat. My father was born in New York City. Both my parents were New Yorkers, so they grew up in the city, Upper East Side, in their little privileged bastions of the Upper East Side back in those days. But they're, as New Yorkers, they're very conscious of restaurant of a restaurant culture being representative of the character and flavor of a city. Okay, so they all, growing up in New York, they grew up going to a certain restaurant. I say talk about it in the book. There were Italian restaurants. There are certain places. There's an oyster bar. my grandfather was a New Yorker who wears fedora hat and like go to, regular places and go to, wherever, where, so the restaurants were played a part already in their sense of the world before my dad went out into the world. They viewed restaurants as, like I said, a window into a culture, a living window, as opposed to going to a museum and going to a church and sitting in an empty giant space. Anyway, so my dad joined the Foreign Service, as it was called, still called, in the early '60s, and he's a China um, expert. So the first place we went, it's the second place. He went to Canada to stamp visas on the Canadian border. And then he decided he wanted to learn Chinese. And in those days, I think still today, you go to Taiwan. It's a 2-year course. It's a city called Taichung. It's on the eastern coast of Taiwan. Anyway, 2-year course. You spend the first year talking and the second year writing. And so him and my mother went through this course, and they learned fluent Mandarin. And Taiwan in the early '60s was, because China was in great turmoil, and Taiwan turned out to be this refugee place for wonderful chefs from all over what was called mainland China in those days. So you had chefs from the north and chefs from Sichuan. These are all restaurant quality chefs because all their places have been closed down. Sichuan, Guangzhou, all these regions were mashed together in Taiwan. And from there, many of those chefs went to the U.S. Many of the things that we now see as sort of staples of Chinese food deliciousness were invented in Taiwan. The soup dumpling, General Tso's chicken, things like that. Anyway, so they found themselves in this cornucopia of Chinese deliciousness, right? And so their instinct, and I was like, at that time, my brother, me, I'm the oldest, and my brother Oliver. And so they would take us around to markets and take us around to you. There's the Peking duck. Let's have Peking duck tonight. Let's have pork dumplings. Let's go have scallion pancakes. A lot of it was Northern Chinese food. And we had this wonderful chef who worked for us, who was from Shandong, which is in the north of China, and he was a restaurant chef, and he lived with his family and he cooked for us. And we lived in the outskirts of this town, Taichung, which is surrounded by rice paddies and buffaloes and like leaning lines of palm trees. He would cook these delicious food. Anyway, so of course we're entranced, and we'd been, to the extent we even had any memories of food, they were of sort of irradiated casseroles from the sort of gray northeast, which is what we would eat when we went back there, like clam rolls from Howard Johnson's or some horrible thing. Anyway, so we got me and Oliver got our sort of taste for that world in Taiwan. And then we moved to Hong Kong. We spent 5 years in Hong Kong. This is the mid '60s. Hong Kong was then a huge expatriate. It was probably the expatriate capital of Asia. You had the Vietnam War going on. You had the Chinese Cultural Revolution. You had all sorts of things filled with journalists. Hong Kong itself was a British colony, but growing all the time. And there were French restaurants. There were, I describe in the book, there's a place called the Repulse Bay Hotel on the other side of the island where we'd go on Sundays, and these tuxedoed waiters would serve this miraculous dish, which turned out to be steak tartare, right? But they do it at tableside with all the. So, the answer is we became hooked. If you want to experience the world through food, if you want to experience the kind of thing that became very popular in the aughts, the Tony Bourdain world of travel and food, which is now going great gangbusters, we were doing that back then.
Can I hit pause for 1 second?
Okay.
What about, so you're moving around, you have your brother,
Yeah.
ironically, not ironically, killing it on the bear now, just in terms of
Killing it on the bear, Oliver Platt, famous actor, killing it everywhere.
yes. What about friends? Do you
Oh,
just have your
yeah, a few for,
brother?
yeah, in Taiwan, we went to a school where they only spoke Mandarin, kindergarten. In Hong Kong, I went to two British schools. Oliver went to different schools than me. Actually, went to the same school. The first was a British military school, and the second one was a British school. I don't know. These were, again, I talked about this in the book. There were these British, very formal British schools ruled by these uh, British Empire ladies with beehive hairdos who would slap you with rulers and administer corporal punishment. And we had a wonderful, and again, I'm not saying they were great or bad. We had friends. We had friends, but like food was what was food? Food was a comfort. And it was a
Mhm.
way to get around the city. And it was a way for our parents to like distract us. And by the way, Oliver and I were these giant ravenous kids. And then another Platt boy arrived, our youngest brother Nick. And so we went around to this like friend, blah, 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 blah. And then we got back to then after Hong Kong, DC for 5 years, introduced to the grimness of mid-Atlantic cooking in the US. And because we'd been used to the small portions of the, pick and pick, my mother, who then we didn't have a cook in Washington, she cooked, but she would give us these like giant bowls of hot dogs or Pillsbury biscuits or whatever. We grew to giant we turned into fat, pimply pigs, basically, and walked around like, oh, whoa. And there we had no friends. Like literally, I was 12, 13. Like you're trying to, I'd already been to 5 schools.
Right,
I'm not saying it, of course it was like the diplomat kid's life, the foreign service brat's life is one of great privilege.
right.
You're always looking at the world from the outside in. Many of the kids I grew up with in that world, you would see them on and off. A lot of them became journalists, ideally, not ideally, but like not surprisingly, they were comfortable with that way of looking at the world. Not all of them became critics, but I think I had a natural critical facility. It was just my nature. I ended up going. My parents ultimately they went to when uh, my father went to China with Nixon because he was an interpreter level. And then when they opened the U.S. diplomatic office in Beijing, he was assigned there. Me and Oliver went to boarding school. Nick went to Beijing, which was in the early 70s. It was the Cultural Revolution. People riding bikes around. Beijing was covered in clouds of dust and smoke. It's just it was fascinating, but it was also like we were traveling to the moon. And then we went to he got reassigned to Tokyo, and I ended up graduating from the American school in Japan. So that was like my 8th school. Not
Wow.
surprisingly, I went to 2 different colleges, and then I became a journalist. And but it's true if you want to. I didn't set out to be a restaurant critic, but it was a unique preparation for that crazy life. And also, because I was large and well fed my whole life, I had the constitution for it.
Right. And you
Constitution.
certainly had the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours of
I had
experience,
that. I had that. I had that. I had that.
millions of hours. When you succeed Gail Green in this job, uh, does she sit down with you and talk through what to expect? And are there things, if you think back, by the way, I had said earlier that you have been doing that for decades with an S at the end. So I know this is decades ago where you might have had this conversation with her. Um, are there things from that time that you remember she said that have stayed with you all of these years, or was it not that kind of chat?
Gail Green was I mean, I don't know if your listeners know, Gail Green had been in the job when I arrived. She'd announced her retirement grandly. I don't know how I don't know how many people they approached to replace her. I'm sure I was not one on the list. I'm probably not 10 on the list. I was probably down there, lower. And but I had an editor who I'd written for who worked in New York and said, and I'd done a lot of travel writing. I'd written a regular column for the now defunct newspaper called the New York Observer, in which I travel. I wrote about food and travel. And so she thought, well, you should, why don't you give this a shot? You might be a good critic. And we had two little kids, and it was it's an appealing gig, you know, for many reasons. Anyway, so Gail, once I was chosen, Gail didn't know who the hell I was. Like, and in that world, in that time, 2000, the restaurant world in New York was dynamic but small. Okay, the food revolution, the restaurant revolution, had not yet blown up and become something that was at the center of the culture, which happened really quite soon afterwards with Bourdain, with David Chang, with this whole revolution of when I arrived, the Frenchman with accents, the Perigord guy, the pompous stage set, right, was still in place. Okay, because the generation of diners before me were people who were not used to fancy food. They were used to being told what to do, what to eat, generally by people with fake French accents, right, or Italian or continental, right?
Right. Yeah.
Generally. But my generation was not cowed by that, and certainly the generation which then that came like the Bourdain generation, which was internet savvy and stuff. They didn't care about any of that stuff, and so uh, uh, what happened is that old pompousness got swept away. But anyway, Gail was part of that old world, part of that sort of small little New York precious world, which was they're all very competent, but they're quite peculiar in their ways. And it was really sort of a sideshow. They were used to being sort of big, big powder pigeons in this little world. And that was Gail. And she invited me to come and have lunch with her at a restaurant opened. It was the first restaurant opened by Alain Ducasse, who was a famous Frenchman. He's still we're talking about Michelin. He's the most decorated Michelin
Right.
chef in France. He's a wonderful chef. He caught the American wave completely wrong. Okay, so in the year 2000, he finally, after much pressure, opened this fancy restaurant on, I think it was on Central Park South in the back of the Sheraton Netherland Hotel. And in retrospect, it turned out to be the last gasp of like the French Empire, right?
Right.
They served these engorged foie gras on plates and roast pigeon, and then they bring on pillows 6 knives for you to cut your pigeons with, and it went on and on. It came from Monaco in the south of France, and this was his like coming out party. And Gail, to her credit, thought, this is ludicrous. And I had one lunch with her. Gail was famous for her hats. She would wear these hats, which were her gimmick. And she gave me a name. She said, ask for Rebecca Lemos. Show up for lunch, ask for Rebecca Lemos. I asked for Rebecca Lemos. I go there. This place is Restaurant Alain Ducasse. You couldn't get in there if you paid $1 jillion to whoever. Like, part of that was because they were not letting anybody in. It was very slow. But anyway, there's Gail by herself, nobody around. Lead us to the table. Gail's not wearing a hat. I sit down. I'm Mr. Nobody. And within 5 minutes, Ducasse comes out and says hi. Oh, Gail, there's all this fake, like, kabuki, like, here we are. I mean, Gail was famous for not just knowing these chefs, but having dalliances with them. I don't think that happened with Ducasse, but she knew Ducasse very well. He knew her. Anyway, so we had this meal, and it was sort of it was like the last years of the kabuki dance. She might as well have been wearing her white powder with her. It was everything was signaled, and the dining room was mostly empty. And I was like, after that, I was like, boy, that was weird. That was weird situation. But also interesting. I mean, she took notes. She's like working. She's working. And
Right.
that's the thing that people don't realize. I soon realized this when I started working, is that they don't realize you're working.
Right.
Yeah, they don't realize that. And you got to tell them that quite quickly. It's like, I'm telling you what to order. I'm taking notes here. In the beginning, I'd take notes under the table and a little scratchy. And when the iPhone came along, I would just tap in the iPhone. But anyway, that was my strange introduction. And Ducasse's restaurant was pilloried and closed quite quickly. And that old mannered world of continental dining was swept away. Really by, and I've written about this, really by the simpler tastes that chefs like, the chefs who've been working in these restaurants enjoyed. Okay, so it was really, you had the farm to table revolution. Farm to table, the essential restaurant was, I don't know if you remember going to Kraft back in the day. Kraft is still open. Tom Colicchio. Kraft was a seminal restaurant because Kraft was really opened, was built around the things that professional restaurant chefs thought about all the time. They thought about the craft of a well-cooked duck breast. They thought about seasonal stuff. They thought about how to cook carrots. And that was Kraft. And initially, Kraft was not designed. Um, they would just serve you the ingredients and you put them together yourself. Like they didn't even want to be chefs. But Kraft turned out to be a seminal restaurant. The restaurant that opened next to it was a place called Kraft Bar, where David Chang worked unsuccessfully. But he took that idea of having a bar. Colicchio's idea was to cook the kind of food his mother or his grandmother cooked out in New Jersey, the Italian food, the comforting, the home food, do it in a bar setting. So you'd have these beautiful veal meatballs, these delicious breadsticks. And many talented chefs came through there. And then they took that model, which was really the stuff that chefs like to eat: mama's meatballs, pork, burgers, pork chops, steak frites. And that, thanks to the rocket fuel of the internet, those quickly became the go-to meals in New York City. And they remain that today. Although French food has never died, you have this great variety in New York. You have now much better, you have tons of great Chinese food, you have Mexican food, you have French food, although it's usually bistro style. Although there are the great chefs of the day, Daniel Boulud, Jean-Georges Vongericht, and they still open great restaurants, right? But in those days, it really was like a revolution. And then you had, Babylon. You had the kitchen. I called it the kitchen slave revolution. It's all the cooks in the kitchen took over the dining rooms, right? And the essential restaurant there was Babbo. Do you know Babbo? Babbo was Mayor Batali's, and Batali was the first one. He was a nutbag, right? He was a creature of the kitchen in all its horror. Okay. But his idea was, he's also a brilliant chef, but his idea was, if you went to Babbo, you would be listening to the kind of music they'd be listening to in the kitchen. You're listening
Right.
to Led Zeppelin, you're listening to the Pixies, and as with all revolutions, this one exploded in its own excesses with Me Too movements, and all the stories came out about not just Batali, thousands of these chefs, and
Right.
the retranchement, and blah, blah, blah. Here we are. So it was an interesting time. And, it's what makes it, it, the real thing that happened is that the restaurant culture, when I started, was a sideshow. And within 5 or 6 years of me writing about it, not because of me, but just because of the way, it was really basically because of social media, it had moved, and guys like Tony Bourdain and his great Kitchen Confidential book, it had moved from a sideshow, literally, for this generation of eaters, for the millennials, really, into one of the central things that they wanted to talk about, know about. It became an extension of the culture as far as they're concerned.
I'm
Made it
thinking,
much more interesting to write about, obviously.
right, but I'm thinking about your lunch with Gail Green and generally her costumes and her way of doing her job. And
Mhm.
I am thinking about, just in terms of like the arc of something, these incredible videos you do with your daughter, where you go into places like donut shops or, taste Balthazar's croissants versus some fun East Village haunt that is very Instagrammable, and sort of just the hilarious way in which you interact with her in these videos, her unbelievable honesty, and your ability, to your point of no longer, not that you ever wore, a mask and a cape, but this way in which you are being completely authentic in the moment with her. And there's something about I mean, I find them incredibly sweet and I find them incredibly humorous and also helpful in terms of what kind of donut and, and
Mhm.
I want to go to the places you told me to go to. But there's something about the casualness of it, and the way in which even that has shifted tremendously in terms of your
Sure,
own approach to
sure,
it, and the accessibility of you
sure,
in these videos.
sure.
And I appreciate that. And I appreciate your willingness to kind of show people that part of yourself. And it is such a departure from the anonymous, I have no family, I have no world except I just write about food and tell you about it, and you can't know anything about me personally. And obviously, in writing your book, you were willing to share so much with us about the history of the Maynards and the Platts and all the people who came before you. Um, I am so thrilled to get to kind of know you and get to know sort of where this passion and love and comfort that food brought you for most of your life, especially as a, a newcomer to so many places with your family, and I find your parents sort of it's very exciting to me. I don't know if your mom originally was as excited about the idea that your father was about taking her children to this other part of the world and
My
something.
father, I say this in the book, right? He wasn't a starchy diplomat. He had a great sense of humor, but his coming from a family of eaters, and like bon vivants and Uncle Frank and my grandfather, and they went to all these restaurants that are no longer with us in New York City. But and I say this in the book, he used to travel around when he would go to these conferences. He'd carry a tube of mayonnaise in his briefcase, to just lighten up the baguette that he was being
Just a little
served.
bit of home wherever he went.
Just let's lighten it up a little bit. And it
Yeah,
remains to this day a mayonnaise addict, and I'm a mayonnaise addict too. So,
it's in the blood.
but what's interesting, I'll just say, like Gail she belonged to that generation of critics. Ruth Reichel was another. Ruth Reichel of the
Yeah.
New York Times, famous for her disguises. Whether you believe it or not, many of the restaurant people say, "Well, yeah, we know Ruth. We know what she looked like." Her most famous review was the one that she wrote soon after coming here from California. And she did a bifurcated review of the Cirque, which was then the great fancy restaurant
Sure.
day. And she went as Gail, not Gail, Ruth, and she went as disguised as what she called in those days a bag lady sitting in the corner. And she described the experience of both. And Ciro Macchione, who was the domineering and very charming guy who ran Le Cirque for many, many years, he said, we knew that was his story always like, we knew that was Ruth. We saw her, we didn't
Right,
want to bother her. But the
right,
story that she wrote, which was the regulars and the famous people are treated different than the schmoes, was accurate. Although they would say, and they're true, we treat regulars, the people who come here, a little better. And if you come off the street, but anyway, what she wrote was accurate and it got everybody's attention. But anyway, that was that generation. And the new generation of critics, I don't know, they're still disguising themselves. The Times critics still disguise themselves. My successor, New York Magazine, he doesn't disguise himself, but he doesn't say I'm here.
hmm
I came out of the closet, so to speak. It was not my idea. It was the idea of Adam Moss, who was a brilliant editor of New York Magazine, probably for 15 years, almost 20 years. And every January, Moss is not a fan of service journalism. You know what service journalism is, right? It's like where to buy a hot dog, where to buy a vacuum cleaner, blah, blah, blah. And
right.
uh, city magazines like New York, they service journalism is their bread and butter. And he was always trying to figure out ways to make it interesting. And I every year I would write something that Gail had started. It was called Where to Eat. Okay. And it came out in January, first week in January. So it gave the staff a week off. I would work on it all fall. Gail would work on it all fall. So it's where I do Where to Eat, but it became somewhat formulaic, like with your top 50 and all this stuff. And Adam goes like, listen, this is what we're going to do. We're doing Where to Eat, but what's going to happen is we're going to put you on the cover with your fat faith. All right. We're not doing this kabuki dance anymore. You're going to write an essay explaining it. Okay. And I was like, and then he goes, is that okay with you? I go, okay. And then, so that's how that happened. I wasn't like, get me out of here. That's why that happened. And like, then Moss did it and they put me in the cover. Then they went on the next thing. They don't, it's like, okay.
But was that outing, as you call it, was that like at the time, did you consult your wife, your friends? Was that like a big decision for you or not
That
really?
was all a secret.
Oh,
It's all a secret. Nobody knew. I was fine. I'm fine. I thought it was all stupid anyways. He got the idea because he'd go out with me and I'm going, they know who I am. It's all dumb.
right,
Kabuki dance. It's like, it's all
right.
stupid. And all these people, they wear these disguises, but if you're in these fancy restaurants in the first 2 months, they're, not only do they know who you are, they have a bunch of ringers who go to the opening restaurants in New York, the best all-star teams of servers, and then they move on to the next place. So you're guaranteed good
To
service.
be
I had
recognized.
also Danny Meyer. He's not a friend of mine, but I know Danny. And Danny used to say, he's also in the book, Danny's a candy restaurateur, right? And they read your reviews. They know what you like. So I'm this big beefy lumberjack guy, and I'm talking about the nice veal chop or whatever the hell I was talking about. And so he said, yeah, when we opened, we'd always have, and it's not just you, these different critics have their things they liked, but we had what we call platnip. Okay. So platnip would be, say, a veal chop, which when they see my giant fat head come in and sit down, it would
Oh,
immediately become a special. And they
right.
come over, they go, well, we have a special. It's veal chop a la gloggity goo boo blah blah blah. And I bite at it like a giant tuna.
Um, Platnip is I'm getting that put on t-shirts.
I
Um,
mean,
before and thank you for naming the episode. Before I let you go, is there a little known fact, and you've already shared a lot, is there a little known fact that you can share as we close out this conversation about
oh, well,
Adam
critics
Platt?
is funny. Oh, critics is like, I'm really an omnivore. I'll eat anything most of the time. I love Japanese food. I like Chinese food. I love Mexican food. I love all the food. There's certain things, uh, when you're ordering in a restaurant as a critic, there's certain things that one would order every day, which are just sort of boring. Salmon's a little boring. Like, how many ways can you do salmon? Weirdly, lamb is a bit boring. Like, how many ways can you do salmon? How many ways can you do lamb? I like all those things, but I sort of stopped eating them. I think the one thing, like, I have an aversion, weirdly, to green peppers.
Not the way to your heart.
I don't like green peppers.
Okay.
I don't like bell peppers.
Okay.
I don't really like red peppers. I think it's probably like, I mean, I'm reformed as a eater and I eat salads. I just have a very nice salad niçoise, but like there's a green pepper in there.
For listeners who aren't watching but listening, he cat Platnip made a face.
Yeah, sour face. It's
That
like kick it out.
a,
Like, no, 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 no,
a
no, no, no. It's
bad.
like some people don't like eggs. Like Alfred Hitchcock famously hated eggs. He said they were freaky. It was like, people have this. With me, it's green pepper.
All right. Well, I shall never serve you green peppers. I'm
Please,
so
please, please don't ever serve me green
I
pepper.
promise I won't. Adam Platt, thank you for scratching the surface,
Just the
truly.
surface.
Just the surface.
Thank you for having me.
It was my pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you soon. And thank you for coming on the podcast. You are such a wonderful guest. I knew you would be, and you did not disappoint. Bless you.
Thanks for having me. And send me copies. We'll put it out on
Everywhere,
all my
everywhere,
platforms. I got 100
all the
platforms.
places. I cannot wait. All
All
right.
right.
Have a great day. I will see
All
you
right.
soon. Thank you. Thank you. Mwah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.